From a residential school to the Saskatchewan legislature, meet Betty Nippi-Albright. Tonight on Nation to Nation, we speak to the new MLA for Saskatoon Centre.
Growing up in a residential school, growing up in poverty, facing racism in the employment sector, I faced a lot of obstacles in my life.
And the new leader of the Federal Green Party intends to be an ally to Indigenous people, particularly when it comes to systemic racism.
Our two communities are by far the most disproportionately negatively affected by the systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and we just simply are not, we're not involved enough.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and welcome to Nation. In the past week, there were two provincial elections, one in British Columbia and the other in Saskatchewan. Between the two, there were 148 seats up for grabs. But out of that, only one First Nations person was elected. And that person is Betty Nippi-Albright, the new representative for Saskatoon Centre. Ms. Nippi-Albright is Cree and Saulteaux and from the Kiniston Saulteaux Nation in Saskatchewan, and she joins me now. Welcome to Nation.
Thank you, Todd.
How excited were you to win?
I was very excited. I was just so grateful that the Saskatoon Centre, the voters there, were confident in an Indigenous woman representing them. This is a big win for Indigenous people.
I guess on the other hand, how disappointed were you to see the Saskatchewan party continue their stranglehold there?
I was not surprised. I truly was not surprised. I was just so grateful that if we win a seat here in Saskatoon Centre, it has to be Saskatoon Centre, and we need Indigenous representation in that area.
You had a pretty unconventional path to becoming a politician, including a few years in residential school. How did all that influence your decision to run?
Well, growing up in a residential school, growing up in poverty, facing racism in the employment sector, I faced a lot of obstacles in my life, being a single parent, that I knew that I was being prepared to serve, because there were things that I was faced with that I had to overcome. And often I walked that journey alone. I was just so grateful that I have a very strong traditional cultural teachings, and that helped me through that and with my family. So when I decided to step up, I faced racism in the workplace, and I thought, and I was going to just quit. I was going to step back and quit. But I have grandchildren that are have darker skin than I do. And I thought, if I don't step up, because I do have a voice, if I don't step up, my granddaughters, my grandchildren are going to have to do this hard work of facing an uphill battle. So when I was asked to step up, I was reluctant, because I didn't believe that having a master's degree and working in the community for over 20 years, I still felt I wasn't qualified enough. And also I was facing sexism, that women were not as sought out as just natural leaders. So I faced those, and when I did decide, I thought, I'm going to step up for the people that don't have a voice, for those Indigenous women, to give them hope that yes, we can face the obstacles, the challenges that we face, and it's a hard road, but we can do it.
So it sounds like a lot of these experiences you've just described to me are going to help you as you serve your constituents.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they certainly will. I've worked in the health sector for over 20 years. I understand, I've lived with the social issues and I understand them. And I also have worked in the trenches in providing services and appropriate services for the community. And I also provincially, like with understanding how the different levels of governments work. I believe my training in university with an Aboriginal Public Administration degree, as well as a master's degree in political studies, will help me serve the people of Saskatoon Centre as well as the province.
When Indigenous people think of Saskatchewan, the name Colton Bushy, of course, springs to mind, or Starlight Tours in Saskatoon. But what other issues are key there?
Employment, addressing the high suicide rates here in Saskatchewan. I've been going to so many funerals in my communities that we need something in place there. We need tangible, concrete solutions to help the communities that are dealing with high suicide rates. And we also need programming to help those that are struggling. We suffer with mental health, whether you're Indigenous or not. Mental health is a huge issue. We need to have appropriate programs available for people when they need it. Crises don't happen between 9 to 5. We need to look at alternative ways of helping those that need the help that they need. Employment is huge in Saskatchewan. The tradespeople are leaving the province to go find work out in other provinces. We need to keep our jobs here in the province.
I'm just wondering, what are the priorities, for Indigenous people, specifically in your riding of Saskatoon Centre?
We need to have a voice at those tables that affect us. When we're looking at issues in the core areas or in Saskatoon, we need to look at being at those tables. We need to have Indigenous leadership be at those decision-making tables for because a lot of the policies that are being brought down from the federal government and being offloaded to and put onto the provincial level, First Nation leadership, First Nation leaders, First Nation voices, Métis voices need to be at those tables. We need leadership to be engaged in a meaningful way and not in a tokenistic manner.
Just to pick up on what you just said about being at those tables, I mean, we often talk of a nation-to-nation relationship between First Nations and the federal government. But I suppose, what should the provincial government, which is the Saskatchewan Party, be doing better to ensure that happens?
Well, first of all, what they could have done is sought out visible Indigenous people to represent, to take part in their party. They need to, this past summer, they had an opportunity to go to, the Premier had an opportunity to go to the legislature, where we had Christian DeRocher there. He had an opportunity there to go and start working and building trust. And trust is huge. Trust needs to be built between First Nations, and there needs to be some concrete actions taken instead of just giving lip service.
Quickly, I just want to ask you, Ms. Nippi-Albright, do you have any ambitions to do what Rob Canoe did in Manitoba and one day become leader of the Saskatchewan NDP party?
Right now, I'm focused on just being a good, serving the community. I come from a long line of leaders. My great-grandfather was one of the signatories to Treaty 4. He signed the adhesion to Treaty 4. So I do come from a long line of leaders, but right now my focus is to serve the community of Saskatoon Centre as well as the province, and to be an effective opposition.
Well, congratulations on your victory, and I'm sure you will be a great representative. Thank you for speaking to me.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
After the break, we speak to the new leader of the Federal Green Party, Annamie Paul. Welcome back. Federal Green Party leader Annamie Paul had a big task earlier this week: win a seat to the House of Commons in what is considered a Liberal stronghold, Toronto Centre. Paul came up short, but got a respectable 1/3 of the vote. Ms. Paul has only been leader since October 3rd, having defeated 7 other candidates to permanently replace longtime leader Elizabeth May. This is her first time on APTN, so Ms. Paul, welcome to Nation to Nation.
Oh, it is such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
As I mentioned in the host intro, you came up just short. How do you see your performance in the by-election?
Well, we were working under really tight timelines, difficult conditions. And so more than anything, I'm really grateful that so many people in Toronto Centre placed their trust in us. We got 1/3 of the vote. What that says to me is that people in that riding and people in Canada are really interested in a green option. They really responded to our positive message for change in the community, and that's very gratifying.
Did the NDP play a little dirty by running a candidate? If you'd had some of those NDP votes, you would have been elected, I think a lot of people feel.
Well, I knew going into this that there was going to be a full slate of candidates from the other parties. I didn't expect any favors. I didn't ask for any. Perhaps some of those NDP voters will vote green the next time. But this was really about showing up for the community. This was from the heart. I didn't look at all of the strategic calculations. I just knew that I wanted to give them the chance for real representation.
Do you feel you need a seat in the House right away, or can you wait for several months until a federal election is called?
Oh, you think it's going to be in a few months, do you?
Well, minority governments don't usually last more than two years.
That's right. Well, it's so volatile, and I think that that's very unfortunate because this is a time where people in Canada, they've said they don't want an election. We have such urgent needs that still have not been met. And so I'm hoping that we're going to put the partisan politics aside as much as possible and get down to that work. That being said, we have to be ready to go at any time. And so, of course, I'm going to be talking with our caucus, with our leadership, with our members about where it makes sense for me to run in the next election. And we haven't ruled anything in or out at this point, but we'll be deciding soon.
I know that former leader Elizabeth May said on another program that if she was asked, she would step down. Is that something you're considering yet? Definitely
not. We are looking to grow seats. If we learned anything from this by-election, it's that people, and even in the safest Liberal seat in the country, people are really interested in our party. They're really ready and willing to consider us. And so I feel very confident that I can run and win elsewhere. And we need and want Elizabeth in Parliament. That would be a loss, not just for the Green Party, but really for anyone who cares about good public policy.
Do you think you'll do as Elizabeth May once had to do herself, and that's run in a seat on the West Coast where you have a very good chance of being elected?
Well, the Green Party should be competitive everywhere in the country. That's really one of my top objectives as leader of the party, to make sure that we are running competitively everywhere, that we have great candidates everywhere. And so, if that's the case, and if I do my job well, then I should have lots of options for communities that I can run in. Of course, some of it depends on, as you said, the timing of the next election, but I believe that Greens can run competitively in Ontario, in the Atlantic provinces, in the prairies. Yes, I said the prairies. And so that's where I'm headed. Not to the prairies necessarily, but I'm headed to competitive seats all over the country.
Well, I'm going to change gears just a little bit and talk about policy now. And you said in the past that systemic racism in policing, for example, must be addressed. But how should it be addressed?
We talked about this quite a lot during the leadership race. Our campaign put out very specific proposals for dismantling systemic racism within policing. We want to see the budgets have really ballooned over the past years. We want to see that brought into check, and we want to see a reduction in funding and having that money reallocated to community services and creating new services where they're needed, particularly around mental health rapid response. The police are doing things now that they were never intended to do. They're not social service workers. They're not trained for that. And we also want to see more national databases with disaggregated data that allows us to really understand the extent of systemic racism in our criminal justice system so that we can address it. You need to know what the problem is so that you can fix it. And so that's something we're pushing for.
You've also said you want to support Indigenous-led land protection. What exactly does that mean?
Well, you know, there's the Green Party has said for many years, and will always continue to say that Indigenous peoples are the stewards of the land, whether it's in this country or abroad. Much of the biodiversity of our planet is found on Indigenous lands, and so the leadership should be set by those who best understand the needs and in a way that respects self-determination and sovereignty as well. If you're looking to do all of those things, have the best public policies in a way that respects sovereignty and self-determination, then it absolutely has to be Indigenous-led.
Are there any other changes you'd like to see to the Green Party's current Indigenous policies?
I want us always to be ensuring that we are the very best allies that we can be. And that means a constant, ongoing conversation with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous leaders across the country. So that is one of my top priorities, to make sure that I have just a direct line of communication with Indigenous leadership across the country. And I want to see lots of Indigenous peoples running for the Green Party of Canada. I really do believe, as I said, that what we need now more than ever is Indigenous leadership leading the way, as opposed to being consulted after the fact. And that's going to require more Indigenous peoples to put their names forward, and I hope they'll do it as green candidates in the next election.
I'm not sure how much you knew about Indigenous people or their issues before October 3rd, so I'm wondering what do you still have to learn about Indigenous people and their daily struggles?
Well, it's always a learning process. You know, though I did deliberately choose to go to law school at the University of Ottawa because there were many Indigenous law professors, and we were taught our foundational subjects through an Indigenous lens. That was a very important experience for me. I also, during the leadership campaign, wherever possible, sought to speak out as an ally to draw the parallels between my people's history of colonialism and oppression, and the need to be a strong ally. But that being said, this is a forever learning process, and my job is to make sure that I have access to the best minds, the best information, the best education, so that I can be a strong ally.
As a visible minority, do you feel that gives you any insight into the lives of Indigenous people?
Well, particularly as a member of the Black diaspora, I'm someone who has no idea where my ancestors are from. I have no idea what their languages or traditions were. Our cultural identity, our connection with our lands was completely wiped out. And so I am the product, the Black diaspora is the product of a long legacy and history of colonialism. And so that absolutely gives me, let's say, a sense of what is at stake when Indigenous peoples struggle and fight to preserve their lands, their history, their traditions. I understand what is lost if those things are lost, and it really increases my determination to be a strong ally.
Well, Ms. Paul, I hope we can see you in person one of these days, and that you do have a seat here on Parliament Hill. Thank you for speaking to me.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. After the break, we'll have more from the ongoing dispute in Caledonia. Welcome back. For over 100 days now, people from 6 nations have taken back a portion of land near Caledonia, Ontario. It's in part to stop a small housing development, but it's mostly about defending their rights. and calling out the theft of land despite having a treaty. To discuss this ongoing fight for Indigenous rights is APTN News reporter Brett Forrester. Thank you for joining us, Brett.
Glad to be here, Todd. Thanks.
Brett, what's the latest going on the ground?
So as you said there in the introduction, this has been going on for well over 3 months. And within that 3 months, there's kind of been a cycle of policing, confrontation, escalation, followed by negotiation and de-escalation. So where we are now is in the negotiation phase that has followed this latest round of escalations. So you may be able to see it behind me or perhaps not, but there's a hydro pole that was set on fire during the escalation on October 22nd, and that knocked out power to 4 homes in the immediate vicinity. And so negotiations are going on right now to try to restore power to those homes, and after that, things will move to the roadblocks and they'll try to negotiate a solution there to de-escalate the situation.
Why are people fighting this relatively small housing development so hard?
Exactly. So this dispute is centuries old, and it's not about the Mackenzie Meadows development or any one development throughout the Grand River Tract. This conflict goes back to 1784, to the Haldimand Proclamation, in which the Crown granted the entirety of the Grand River watershed to the Six Nations to settle upon and take possession of forever. And throughout the centuries, they've been dispossessed of 95% of that land, and they've essentially been pushed and consolidated onto their current boundaries. And many of those land surrenders they believe to have been outright theft or illegal surrenders, which they continue to dispute to this day.
So how does this dispute get solved? Where does the accountability fall?
It's going to get resolved in one of 3 ways: confrontation, negotiation, or litigation. And you can see behind me where confrontation gets you. Litigation has been languishing in the courts since 1995, and negotiation has been tried in the past. The Six Nations Elected Council launched 29 specific land claims. Only one was resolved between 1982 and 1995 when they launched their lawsuit. And they got so frustrated with the inability to settle their claims through that process that they did indeed launch that lawsuit. And that trial for that is set for 2022, but I don't think litigation is going to be the answer here. So everyone's calling on both the provincial and federal governments to get to the table and resolve this through peaceful negotiations.
So Brett, can you give me a sense of how all this is impacting the communities, both in Six Nations and in Caledonia?
Well, you can repair a road relatively quickly, but you can't repair the harm caused by a dispute like this and the effect it has on the communities. So both in Six Nations of the Grand River and Caledonia, there's a great deal of division. Within Six Nations, there's a dispute and governance conflict happening between the elected council and the hereditary chiefs government. And here in Caledonia, there is also many people who support the movement, the land back movement, and they agree with the land defenders and understand what they're out here doing and how they're standing up for their rights. But there's also faction within Caledonia and those outside who violently sometimes oppose this development, and there's real concerns coming from the land back camp that there could be sectarian violence, that there could be white supremacy or some sort of retaliation against the camp. We've heard that land back spokesperson Skylar Williams has had death threats against his family, so both communities are trying to navigate this as best they can.
Brett, thank you for bringing us up to speed on this.
Thank you, Todd.
That's our show for this week. If you missed any part of it or any episode from earlier in the year, check out our podcasts. Go to aptn.ca/podcast. I'm Todd Lamoran. Please stay safe and healthy, and thanks for watching.